G'day, it's your old mate Matthew here. Welcome to the Yarnsman podcast. In this episode, we have a good yarn with Kris Taylor. Kris talks through his experience of the Talking Masculinities Project and how there's actually quite a positive view for the youth of today. He provides a lot of definition and information on the groups associated to the manosphere, which are incels, men going it alone, and the red pill, that are taking advantage of young men's anxieties. I suppose the interesting thing was that the idea of a lot of these groups is that feminism and the Western society has gone too far, and that young men are lost and don't know what to do. There's that loneliness, isolation, and they look to these people for a sense of community. There's a lot to unpack in this one, and we do touch on self-harm. So if you find that triggering, please step out or check our website for support resources. Yeah, there was a bit here, but hope you enjoy the yarn. Hello and welcome to the Yarnsman podcast. Today we have Kris Taylor joining us, on Teams, and we've found out that we can actually set it to New Zealand English, which is all positive stuff. Kris is a researcher, academic, and involved in the Talking Masculinities Project. How you going, Kris?
Doing pretty well. It's a beautiful day here. I live in a small town called Town, which is just south of Paeroa, and the weather's just absolutely beautiful. So I'm looking forward to a day in the garden, I think, after this.
Well, that's fantastic. That's great for well-being and connecting with nature. So I love that.
Yeah, it's great for my belly too, because we've got so many tomatoes. A lot of pasta sauce to make.
Very good. What have you struggled with in the last week?
I have developed a greater awareness of an anxiety, a sort of overriding or underlying anxiety that I feel all the time. And post lockdown, actually, in Auckland, because we were living in Auckland, I started to develop quite bad headaches and migraines associated with stress. I'm not very good at recognizing my own level of stress, and it's almost like it's a way for my mind or my body to signal to me that I need to slow down and settle down. So last week I had 2 days of headaches and migraine, and it was a good reminder to stop and think about what was going on and what I was stressed about and everything else. But I think the difficulty of it and what I've been struggling with this week is trying to recognize where those stresses are coming from, because on paper at the moment my life is very relaxing. There's not too many points of stress, but then in its own way that is also a stressful thing. Sometimes you need somewhere to focus your attention. So I would say, to answer it briefly, it would be this constant checking in and awareness of a level of anxiety that I think for a long time I was in denial about.
Right. As a migraine sufferer, it's really, it is part of the challenge of being aware of those triggers, both.
Yeah.
And, just thinking about it, but then it's also, I can tell when one's coming on. And if I haven't had one for a while, then you're like, what's that weird thing that's going on? And then it takes me, a day, half a day to work out, right?
That's exactly it. That was me on Tuesday. I was like, man, I feel so weird. I don't know what is happening. I was like, and I told my partner, I was like, man, I'm feeling really like fucking fucked up. And then it started, and I was like, oh, I know what this is. But it was like, all of the, just feeling out of my body, feeling really kind of like foggy, kind of like in a dream state, all of that stuff. And, as I say, this was something that happened after, basically, I had burnout in the second lockdown in Auckland. And as a product of that and other stressful experiences in my life, I think I developed this stress response. And so in some ways it's good. As I say, it's a good signal to me to like slow down and think about what I'm up to. Whereas before I probably would have been a bit more, just knuckle down and push through it and harden up, or whatever kind of cliche phrase we want to use. But, in a way, the positive thing about a migraine is there is no pushing through. There is no hardening up. There is just lying in a dark room, waiting for it to be over.
Hiding, yeah. No,
Hiding, yeah.
I've got quite good at hiding. What would you like to work on in the next week?
Well, to go from the mental and psychological to the practical, we moved house in April last year, and I've been slowly renovating the house, teaching myself some watching a lot of YouTube videos about how to lay a tongue and groove
Nice.
floor and that kind of thing. So I just yesterday finished painting my office, which is why we're speaking for the listeners that we're speaking on video. This is my kitchen actually. So I'm looking forward to getting that finished. And I mean, maybe along with the stress part of me is I have this hyperfixation thing. Once I start a task, I just need to get it done. So that's probably part of the anxieties. I'm like, got to get it done, got to get this skirting board delivered. So I got to head into town and hit up the guy who was supposed to deliver my skirting board last week, and then get it down, and hopefully get the office finished by the end of the week and get all my shit in order, you know.
Oh, I mean, that's quite a cool wee project, and I mean,
you say we project, it's been quite a big project.
Yeah, I mean, we've just got our building consent to do renovations on our house. Let's be honest, these hands won't be doing any of the hard work because it might be more expensive. What are you proud of?
I'm pretty proud of what I've learned in terms of the renovation side of things. My brother is a builder, and he was very generous and said to me that just give it a go, and if it doesn't work, you can just take it down and start again. And I really liked that piece of advice. Like, what's the worst that could happen? I mean, because I'm not doing anything structural, because let me be clear to the listeners, if you're doing anything structural, sometimes you can't just give it a go and start again. But doing things like, putting the floor down, or staining the deck, or painting a room, or whatever, or plastering and putting up jib, you can just, if it's not right, you just do it again. And I think that is a pretty good lesson in that. But the other thing that I'm really proud of, and this has been playing on my mind for a while, is so I did a PhD at Auckland in psychology that I finished in 2020. I then did a postdoctoral 2-year project, and then this last year I've been contracting and doing lots of different odds and ends. And with the shape of things at the moment, in terms of where funding is going, for those listeners that know, there's the Marsden grant, which was one of the biggest funders for social science, has been cut, which means that I won't be able to do funded research of the kind that we'll talk about later. And just the shape of the job market in academia, I made the decision to start a counselling master's. So next week I'll be going back to being a student, which has been pretty humbling, but and quite scary. But I'm quite proud of myself for taking that initiative and for saying, where am I at my life? What do I want my the next period of my life to look like? How do we get there? Does it mean stacking up my student loan again and sitting in class? And so that in and of itself has a little bit of excitement, but also a little bit of dread. But it's a challenge that I've put upon myself, and I'm pretty proud to be taking these steps.
Good on you. I think that's a really positive thing. What gives you hope?
Well, maybe what we'll be talking about in a bit is a lot of the work that I've been doing since my PhD has been working with boys and young men, mostly in schools, and so much of that work has given me hope. So many young men that I've spoken to have left me with a really positive view of where young men are at, or what they're capable of, or what they think. And so that has been a big driver for me in the work that I do, and gives me hope, is that there are young men out there who are really interested in doing things differently, really interested in figuring out who they are, and just need a little bit of guidance, and unafraid to, get guidance or look for guidance. But the issue comes with where they get their guidance from, and whether that's readily available. So I do have a lot of hope for young men, which has been I didn't expect that when I started this work with young men, and it's been a positive and a motivator for me to have these experiences of sitting down in rooms with groups of young men and have these quite profound realizations and experiences with them, have them tell me things that surprise me and give me hope.
Well, that's amazing to hear. Well, perhaps we just dive straight into it, mate. Why don't you give us the background about the Talking Masculinities Project, and give us the yarn around it.
Yeah, sure. Where do I begin? So I've always had a fascination with masculinity since when I was a teenager. When I was a young man, I was always fascinated by the idea that there are a set of rules, there are a set of expectations. I actually grew up in Ōtautahi, so where you are right now, I grew up in Christchurch and lived there until I was 20. And I was always interested in this idea of expectations about how I was supposed to behave, clothes I was supposed to wear, music I was supposed to listen to, things that I could and couldn't do. And that led me to resist some of it. I got involved in the alternative music scene. I got involved in, all sorts of different ways of resisting it. I was very probably dickishly antagonistic towards rugby fans, and I apologize to any rugby fans out there if I was a prick to you. But that was, if I think about it, that was the impetus that years and years later led me to be interested in working with men and talking about masculinity. And I know that masculinity sometimes sounds like an academic term or as an abstracted term, but at its root, what I've been interested in is what are the expectations that we have from others and the expectations that we put on ourselves that shape the way that we can live our lives as men. And that's where this project and my interest in it really began, because in some ways some of those rules and some of those expectations don't serve us very well. I mean, if this podcast and the Yarnsman is about suicide prevention, we know full well that those expectations and pressures that men put on themselves can be quite a big factor in feeling hopeless or feeling alone. And so Talking Masculinity came from a project which I had done before called Shifting the Line, which was where I worked with, me and a larger team worked with groups of boys in schools, asking them about their experiences of gender, as in what their expectations around masculinity are, what femininity is, what relationships look like, but also with an eye towards trying to understand the connection between those dynamics and violence, that is, violence and sexual violence committed by men predominantly against women and boys predominantly against girls, and getting their feedback and their understanding of what those dynamics look like. And that's the beauty of it, because I know that some men, when I start talking about these things, feel a little bit under attack, or they might feel a little bit defensive. The beauty of talking to young men about it is it's their words, it's their perspectives, it's their desire to change, or their questions or their uncertainties that come through. It's not me giving anybody a lecture. And the beauty of this model was it was about creating an environment for young men to feel comfortable talking about things that they'd never talked about before. And so that became the bedrock of all of the work that I did afterwards, is we as adults, and even me as a 38-year-old man, there are young men, they have knowledge and understandings about things I have no idea about. I don't know about TikTok. I don't fucking know about, what is it, Discord, or like, I mean, look, I'm a gamer, but I play like Civilization or like, old school games. So I was really interested in sharing with them, like understanding where they're coming from, understanding what kind of environment they live in, and what kind of social relations they have. And that work, the Talking Masculinities Project, was much more focused on that online thing, because there's this big panic at the moment about boys' online lives, and some of it for good reason. You've got your Andrew Tates and your kind of misogynistic influencers, and you've got these communities on Reddit and elsewhere that appeal to young men. And I was interested in, what is the appeal? Like, why do young men gravitate to these figures? What is it that is appealing about them? Because that's where we need to start. We can't start by being like, hey, you like Andrew Tate? Andrew Tate's a dick, don't watch him. Because that doesn't work. You need to be like, what is it about Andrew Tate that you like? What does he speak to that's missing in your life? And then from there we can start to explore. So sorry, I realize that's a bit of a rant. I could go on. I could go
No,
on
no,
and on about this.
but I've got a ton of questions, and maybe we should start with the definition of some of the terms that are out there. You know, there's
Sure.
the manosphere, there's incels, and what was the latest acronym? Is it men going it alone?
Oh,
Is
there's
that one?
men go their own way. They're quite an old
That one.
community, actually. Yeah, MGTOW. Yeah, they've been around for
So,
ages.
so tell us about that. Those communities. What's the sort of definition, and how do they, um, uh, end up there?
Yeah, so the manosphere is like an umbrella term that people use. It's not very accurate, because it suggests that all of these groups, and they could be like the red pill, which is a kind of misogynistic group. And sorry to any listeners who are affiliated, but I mean, that's just, let's be real. There's groups like the pickup artist community, which seems to have not been as popular lately, but used to be very popular on places like Reddit. And then there are other groups like the incel community and the black pill and others who are more skewing towards that kind of violent nihilism worldview. So the manosphere describes all of those groups. And it's a useful term in the sense that we can describe an online environment where men tend to congregate and talk about um, different topics and approach those topics in different ways, but they're all unified by an essential philosophy that we could describe as you could call it the red pill or the black pill or something like that. But the core tenet of all of that is an idea of anti-feminism, and that is the idea that feminism and Western progressivism have gone too far. They've emasculated men and have meant that men are lost and don't know what to do. And so I think that that's part of the appeal, is it gives a nice explanation for why some men might feel alone or isolated or alienated or under attack. But the other part of it that's a really big factor is it gives you a sense of community. You have a group of people who all speak to the same issues that you're feeling. You have a shared vernacular. You have shared interests. So you've got two things there. You've got a nice, clean explanation for why your life might not be going the way that you think it is. And then you've got a sense of community, people who can support you and build you up. And so that runs a spectrum, whether it's men go their own way or better off abroad, or these kind of groups who swear off their whole thing is they're like, Western women have been ruined by feminism, and therefore either I'm not going to attempt to sleep with women at all, or the better off abroad people are like Western women, so they all go to Eastern Bloc countries or Thailand or wherever. And all the way through to incels who have a similar worldview, in the sense that they say feminism has done these things, but they would take that out in the form of either ostracization, self-harm, or harm to others. And so you can see in just those examples, you've got the same dynamic. Women are to blame, feminism has ruined women, blah, 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 but different ways of behaving, different ways of doing it. And yeah, I mean, I should say here that I'm aware that you probably have quite a diverse listenership. You probably have quite a diverse group of men out there listening to this, and some of them will probably be reacting and thinking, "Oh, this woke lefty feminists, blah blah blah, who's you have no idea and everything else." I mean, I wear a feminist allegiance as a mark of of pride. I'm very happy to be labeled that way. And I would invite any men who have an issue with that to get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to discuss the ways that feminism and feminist thought can benefit men tremendously. So yeah, that's just a little aside. Feel free to edit that out if it's
No, but I think that's an important thing to note. Yes, so many questions. I think in all your conversations with young men and things, what were some common themes around what modern day masculinity means?
Yeah. I noticed something because I've been doing this work with young men for 7 or 8 years. I have noticed a shift in the last few years, and this is not statistically significant. It's not a population-based thing where I can say 8 years ago, 40% of boys thought this. This is just based on my observation, so please take it with a grain of salt. I have noticed that there has been seemingly an increasing emphasis for young men on outward appearance, including physicality, the way they dress, and those sorts of, we could call them like superficial markers of what it means to be a man. That means be muscly, have a six pack, dress in a particular way. And I mean, we've all done this to a degree in the past, and we all adhere to this to some degree, even as older men. But I've noticed a more orthodox view of this coming through. And so for lots of the young men that I speak to, when we get into talking about masculinity, the things that they identify as being masculine tend to be relatively two-dimensional. Like being masculine is being tough, or being masculine is not crying, or being masculine is. And it's a shame, because if you only have those superficial touchstones for what it means to be a man, then it's very difficult to think more broadly about what that might be like. At the top of the conversation, I said, I'm looking forward to going out in the garden. And there's an interesting question there about, is gardening masculine? I mean, it's like physical work. And then it's like, well, is growing vegetables masculine, but growing flowers is not? I mean, we can get into quite an interesting conversation there about something more deep and more complex about what it means, rather than just being like, I have a big bicep. Or two big biceps, obviously. But I mean, like, so that's the thing that I have noticed is that young men that I've spoken to sometimes come in, and I should say more often than not, come in with a relatively rigid idea of what it means to be a man, and are frustrated by that. When we get into talking about it, they are frustrated by those limitations, by the ways that they're told, and by the models that they're offered about what masculinity means.
And this is still going back to the traditional idea of being the breadwinner, being the main source, the upholding the household, or well, actually a lot of them won't be in a relationship or a household where they are that person yet, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting observation, because I'm speaking to 15, 16, 17-year-old boys, and they're talking about, they're like, I want to have like a 6-figure income, and women. One of the ones that was the most surprising to me is I have had young men being like, what women want is a guy with a 6-pack, 6 figures, and who's 6 feet tall. And I'm just like, have you talked to any women? Like, you're 15. Like, and one of the things is, so that's a good example of how that two-dimensional idea about what masculinity means and what that's supposed to mean for women and everything doesn't really translate to the real world in a one-to-one way. And for me, one of the things that I find sad about that is it shuts down a conversation about, well, what about sense of humor? What about being a good communicator? What about kindness, generosity? Like, what about those other things that make you a more well-rounded, I mean, in my opinion, make you a more well-rounded human and make you more attractive? This idea of, the six-figure, 6-pack, 6 feet tall thing is just doing a lot of damage to young men's confidence, because if they believe that that's all it is, it's like, well, you can't just suddenly become 6 feet tall. And lots of us aren't going to make 6-figure incomes.
Yeah, right. How can we challenge that? Is this the Andrew Tate narrative that's coming through thick and fast, or is there a spectrum across young men?
I mean, it's not just Andrew Tate. I feel sort of a bit of a sense of frustration that Andrew Tate has become. I mean, it's been good for me in my work because it's given us a touchstone. If we're talking to schools, then school staff understand or are worried about this guy. But it's a bit of a concern because it suggests that he's just like a one bad actor on the internet. And if we get rid of him, then we get rid of all of this problem. But as you've said, Matthew, like there are all of these communities. There are lots of different influences on the internet and lots of different people who want to make money, if I could say it strongly, weaponizing young men's anxiety, again, to sell them products. And not just young men either, older men as well. So there is the Andrew Tate narrative coming through, but there is this ecosystem of other influences and other people who recognize the value in the same way that women have had, makeup and products and all sorts of things sold to them for decades based on zoning into their anxieties about aging, let's say, or being attractive or hygiene or whatever the thing is. We're really seeing a shift towards the same kind of marketing towards young men and grown men, but it's all just like, supplements, supplements are for girls, but if you take brain force or fucking like whatever the thing is, then you'll be a real man. And it's just like, it's the same, what would you call it? It's the same mechanism. It's the same desire to sell product based on your insecurity. And the problem is, if you're a 15-year-old boy, you are by nature insecure about who you are. You are insecure about what your future is going to look like. You don't know what kind of man you want to be. You don't know what kind of person you want to be, or what you're going to be doing in a few years' time. What your relationships are like, whether you can have relationships, all of those things. And so it's a very cynical move to just come in and be like, hey, young men, let me give you advice. All you need to do is buy my course. And this course won't make you happy. This course will set you up for failure because, again, it's like if you're boiling masculinity down to a very simplistic set of rules, the world is complicated and relationships are complicated and require compromise and communication and all of these other things that are not addressed in that. And so, it sets you up to eventually, like this young guy who was saying 6 figures, 6 feet tall and everything else. It's like, if you go to the gym and get buff and you get the salary and you're 6 feet tall and whatever, and you don't get a girlfriend or you don't get married or women don't find you attractive and find you annoying because you're fucking talking about eating broiled broccoli and chicken all the time, then it's a perfect segue to then blame women and blame feminism and say, oh, well, I've done everything right. There must be something wrong with women. And that's just an easy cop out instead of saying, is it more complicated than just fitting into this narrow man box idea?
So a big thing for us is about creating those opportunities for a good yarn. And if we have young men or just men in general in online communities that are picking them up and supporting that notion, what are ways that the society community as a whole, whether it be mothers, fathers, partners, or friends network, that can start to challenge that in a safe or non-aggressive way and get them to perhaps connect in person?
It goes back to, the first and most fundamental part of it for me, and what I've been doing working in schools lately. So I've been working with some schools in Dunedin, the all-boys school, 3 of the all-boys schools in Dunedin, and I've been working with some schools in Auckland. One of the things that we need, I think the first place that we need to start is to understand, as I said, the appeal of these messages and the appeal. Like, what does that do for you? And it doesn't make you a bad person to be like, I should caveat this. It doesn't make you a bad person to say, oh, I want to work out more and that will make me more attractive and make me feel less anxious or whatever. Um, and we can understand that. However, we do need to make sure that we're not also applying that same sense of understanding to those who commit mass violence, let's say, because it's obviously quite, and I'm talking specifically about incels and the and that white supremacist community. But to understand the appeal, we do need to express some sense of empathy and understanding and say, okay, if you're seeing figures like Andrew Tate and he's saying all of this misogynistic stuff, there are probably things in that message that make you feel better about yourself or make you feel more in control of your life. And so I think as the adults in the room and as the teachers and guardians and parents of young people, it's our job to step into that space and offer something that gives that same sense of security or belonging or confidence that they get from the online. And so that's easier said than done because, as I know from speaking to a lot of teachers and a lot of parents, they don't actually know anything about the. And I don't mean to speak too generally, but for the most part, they don't really know very much about the online environment. They don't really know very much about the kind of messages that these young men are hearing and which ones are resonating and why. And so for me, the beginning is to help to educate older people to better understand what that looks like. So that's one part of it. Another part is that we need to better understand the diversity of masculinity and allow young men room to explore what that looks like. Celebrate their ability to do things without it being competitive, without it being about dominating other people. Because you can be masculine in all kinds of ways, right? So I'm an academic. There is a degree to which being intelligent or being credentialed could be seen as a sort of masculine thing. I mean, you can look at somebody like Jordan Peterson, for example, who isn't really the most masculine person in the world, but has this, or Ben Shapiro, or any of these kind of guys who are what I would describe as the kind of debate nerd sort of category of masculinity. That they are still seen as masculine, but it's competitive. It's about dominating other people. It's about showing your superiority, and it's just so tiresome, and it's such a waste of your energy to do. And so we need to find ways to celebrate doing things for the sake of doing them because you enjoy them and not because you want to express that you're better than somebody or because that sort of thing. And we can still do challenges like me doing my house, and feel a sense of fulfillment at doing things that we might see as masculine. But it gives me immense joy to grow flowers in the garden or to do these things, and it's not about being like, oh well, look at my fucking roses, they're a lot better than yours.
What's really interesting to me is I went to an all boys school and went to boarding school, and as a non-rugby player at high school, that was a very interesting time because first 15, all that sort of time, and I guess you echo those feelings from your earlier comments. And I wonder about how people that don't fit into that mold, then go looking for these communities elsewhere. And it's about, as you said before, around being curious and celebrating those wins or those other environments and giving people space to. Well, I hate the term giving people space, giving people opportunity. Giving people opportunity and support to go and pursue those other things. So actually, I mean, this isn't a question, this is more of a statement. It's like actually allowing those things to happen and supporting it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Giving you, like, one of the things that young men that I spoke to a lot, one of the things that came up a lot when I was speaking, we talk about the ways that ideas about masculinity can kind of fence you in to a box, and it can stop you from doing, or not necessarily stop you, but make certain avenues of exploration less likely. Let's say you wanted to do drama at high school. That might be more difficult if you were being steered more towards a rugby place. And it becomes more difficult for you to resist that just based on the expectations that other people have of you, the sort of models that you're fed about what is of value and what is not of value. And it's a shame because the boys that I spoke to, some of them were talking about, they were like, oh, I wish I could have pursued a different career, a different avenue in high school, but I was forced by my father to play rugby. Or I wish that I could talk about this television show that I really like, but I don't get to do that with my mates because they'll say that I'm gay and that I'm a girl and blah blah blah. And so that's a really important factor in this, is the way that if we view masculinity as this very rigid sort of ring-fenced idea about what kind of a person you want to be, you close off so much of your life. You close off so many different experiences. Like I just during lockdown, I started watercolor painting, which is something that I hadn't done since I was like a teenager. And it's been really interesting telling people about that, engaging their reactions, because you know, there's a sort of, oh well, that's not very manly, but at the same time, it's kind of like, well, why not?
Yeah. Well, I suppose, is there a thing there around, depends what you're painting. If you're painting like pieces of meat and
yeah, painting a fucking Ford Falcon, yeah. I'm watercolor painting, but I'm doing it on a car. Yeah. I mean, it's, yeah. So those sorts of things are interesting. And I mean, I should say that the challenging of those boxes becomes easier as you get older. It's so much more difficult when you're a teenager, as you well know. You know, like if you were resistant to that rugby culture as a 15, 16-year-old, then it's a very difficult and sometimes dangerous place to be. You know, I was beaten up and bullied severely as a teenager for resisting some of those norms. But the other thing is, and I should extend an olive branch to my rugby playing and rugby fan brethren, which is that I get frustrated that rugby players and rugby clubs are often stereotyped as being this kind of hotbed of misogyny or hotbed of sexism and everything else. But my experience of nerd culture and online gaming culture, those places are significantly worse in terms of their attitudes to women, in terms of their attitudes towards relationships and what masculinity is. And it goes back to my earlier comment, which is like, you can kind of recoup a sense of masculinity through anything as long as you're using it to dominate other people. So you can see the competitiveness in online gaming communities, for example, and the homophobia and racism and sexism that comes through in some of those environments. I used to play a lot of Counter-Strike, so for anyone who plays Counter-Strike, they know exactly what I'm talking about. Again, showing my age. But like, I do get frustrated with this idea where it's like, oh yeah, it's the rugby club or the jock boys and they're the problem. And it's like, no, it's something more than that. It's something more pervasive and broader, and something that I think we can all identify once we open up about it. Yeah.
Do you think there's a role to play in curiosity and following that curiosity?
Oh, you're speaking my language. That is how I would describe myself, as curious about the world, curious about, and it's why I did psychology, I think, because I was curious about people and how people work and why we make the decisions that we make and how we get to, you know, how we relate the ways that we do and so on. But, you know, curiosity, being led by your curiosity, I think is what is often missing. Is, you know, if there's something that's interesting to you, ideally, it shouldn't matter if somebody else thinks that's weird. I mean, this is the contradiction at the heart of masculinity that I find so fascinating, right? Which is that on the one hand, a traditional man box idea of masculinity is that you can do whatever you want. You're a man alone. What other people think doesn't matter to you. And yet, on the other hand, masculinity is so about conforming, and it's so about being part of the crowd, not standing out, making sure that you do everything correctly. And this is what young men tell us, is this contradiction here between, let's say, being really brave, but also not standing up against sexism when your mates say a sexist joke, which is inherently brave. And so there's a really interesting conversation to be had there with young men about, like, how do we balance these two things? You can do whatever you want, but you can't wear a pink t-shirt. You can do whatever you want, right? You're a man alone who follows his passions and does whatever he likes, but you can't do drama because your dad said that you have to play rugby.
Mm.
And so there's a contradiction at the heart of it there. And I think that's where we can have these really productive conversations, because all men recognize that contradiction. Because we've all had experiences where we're like, oh, I'd like to study entomology so I can find out about monarch butterflies or something like that. Can you really do that? Like, you might feel like you can, but to what degree do the like social relations and expectations and the way you're brought up actually stop you from doing the things that you're passionate about or curious about, or even taking that first step to
Mm.
finding out something?
So much of well-being, mental health challenges, depression or anxiety, comes about from a difference, or the difference between what the person thinks society demands of them and what they're willing or able to do. And I feel like curiosity might be a cure for that.
I mean, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that being led by and the wonder of the world, the wonder of other people and the kind of lives they lead. And I'm so interested in people, but I'm also interested in nature and interested in, well, just, all sorts of things. And sometimes I do shut those things off. Sometimes I am still resistant, being socialized and growing up as a young man and into a man. There are still ways that I'm not. In some ways, I'm a hypocrite. I still, at the top of the conversation, I still struggle to express my emotions. I still struggle to identify stress when I'm under stress. I still struggle to reach out for help. I'm aware of those things and I'm trying to work on it, but I don't want to pretend like it's some sort of easy thing to just be like, yeah, I'm going to get into botany, because I know that contradiction. I know the struggle that it could take and the difficulty of finding safe people to reach out and talk to about it. So I don't want to make it out like it's just as easy as just being like, yeah, I'm just gonna go off and do something totally left field, because it can be very distressing. I think what it begins with is identifying it in yourself and thinking like, what is it that I wish I could do? Like what are the things that could be worth exploring? And you don't need to commit to those things 100%. You can, even me with starting this counseling degree next week, I may get halfway through and I hate it, and that's okay.
I love
It's
it.
okay,
That's
it's okay to fail. It's okay to walk away from something.
100%. And I think the thing to this is a nice way to kind of wrap it up is, yeah, it's okay to try some things and get out and be curious, but probably just to pair that with, it is a journey. It will be shit one day. It might be great the next, but life is dynamic. It's not static. Things
Yeah.
don't change, and to be comfortable with that, right?
Yeah. And I think it's about balancing that combination of openness to experience while at the same time being sort of not protective, being conscious of yourself, understanding yourself, which I think is a really
Mm.
big part of it. And I'm not a huge, I think you said earlier, what was it, making space? There are lots of terms, things that I don't love. I don't love a kind of individualistic focus on things, but I do think that men are often raised, especially in this country, raised in a way that we are alienated from our understandings of our own emotions and our own internal lives, and we're not offered we're not modeled a vocabulary for speaking about our emotions or putting it into words. And so there is a sense of trying to understand that within ourselves if we can. And it's, that's also about being curious about our own our own
Mm.
selves. I wanted to say as well, just one final, if we are wrapping up, one thing that I wanted to say that I'm sure it comes up a lot, and so I thought I might address it, is in my work and in conversations that I have, lots of people use this term toxic masculinity, like it's a term that comes up heaps. Um, And I don't love it. I mean, it's a pretty good umbrella term in the way that the manosphere is a sort of generalized term that you can use to describe some kind of behavior. But I don't use it mainly because it's open for misinterpretation. It can make men defensive. Men can say, oh, what you're saying is masculinity is toxic and everything else. And so anyone who wants to engage in those conversations about so-called, in quotes, toxic masculinity, you might have noticed that I've been using terms like rigid masculinity or the man box or something like that. And it's a much better way to frame these things because, as I said earlier, I haven't met any men that can't understand the ways that certain things about masculinity are restrictive to us. Certain ways of understanding masculinity make life more difficult. And so if we just need to change that language. It's basically the same concept, but you can just say man box, rigid understanding of masculinity. I don't like to say traditional understandings of masculinity because people get offended by that. Men get offended by that. But yeah, so that was just a little, let's call it a caveat at the end or an addendum, just to use a big stupid academic word.
No, I really like that, and it is a term that does get thrown around a lot, and then adds to the confusion, right? And adds to people feeling more threatened or pigeonholed. And so, yeah, really calling that out as an umbrella term that is not always best or most helpful to use. So, yeah, Kris.
I just wanted to add. Sorry, I know I could go on and on, but one of the things just following on from what you've just said there is that often we're also expected, as men, there's a initial response is often defensiveness. Like, if get something coming back your way, whether it's criticisms or comments or whatever it is to immediately become defensive, and that combative reaction is expected. That's how we deal with things. And so the toxic masculinity conversation just immediately launches directly into defensiveness. And so the key to, if we circle back to what it is to start these conversations or work with young men or work with these communities of men who have these beliefs, we need to find ways to move around that defensiveness, bring them in, and then we can start doing that work. But it's about being, again, let's be aware and not be obfuscate that there is a defensiveness that we often carry with us when we're criticized or feel slighted or ostracized that allows us to avoid doing that internal work, that internal curiosity, thinking about our behavior and why we react the ways we do. Sorry, Matthew, I could go on, and I know you've probably
this is all really good stuff, and it is that just being curious, again going back to being curious, but and starting the conversations and trying not to get people defensive, but it is more of an art than a science, and you have to keep at it. But Kris, mate, this is fantastic yarn. There's lots in here. Really appreciate sharing your work and your insights and making time for the yarn today. I suppose I'll finish by saying good luck with the new course next week.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's exciting, it's daunting, but I'm really
good on you, mate.